All right, everyone. Welcome. We're going to get started with our first session today, titled Software Engineering Benchmarks and Insights Roundtable. Now, we have a wonderful agenda for this session. We're going to look at a bunch of different insights, 5 of them. But before we get there, I want to introduce our amazing roundtable guests, starting with Tara Hernandez, VP of Dev Productivity at MongoDB. Welcome, Tara.
Hello.
And of course, we also have Rob Zuber, CTO of CircleCI. Welcome, Rob.
Hello, everybody. I'm just gonna ad lib right away. It's really weird being up here. It's just like a bunch of bright lights in my face, and all I can see is glowing LinearB things, but they're very cool.
And a really big pipe organ.
Yeah, can we play the organ?
You know what I told them is make this look like a 90s roller rink. And I think they executed it really well. Maybe we can play the organ, but amazing to have you both here.
Freebird.
All right. So for today's agenda, we're going to look at 5 insights. We're going to look at the PR lifecycle, the PM hygiene, DORA metrics, code quality, and predictability. This is all coming from the 2025 engineering report that you should all have. And just a little bit of information about the report before we get started. So on the left-hand side, you'll see the population size. Yeah, we're keeping up. So we looked at about 6.1 million pull requests, over 3,000 organizations, 32 countries. You have a bunch of different calculation types in there. P50, P75. New for this year is P90 and average. This is the 4th generation of the report. And this year we have 7 new metrics that we've added. The first 2, approve time and merge time, that's looking a little bit more at developer experience, breaking down review time, getting a little more granular. We added PR maturity. And then we added a bunch of different ones here, issues linked to parents, branches linked to issues, in-progress issues with estimations, in-progress issues with assignees. These are all what I consider predictability or predictable delivery metrics. And I've seen you, both of you actually, in a webinar, so I know which one you might like here. And it's one that I hear, it's also the one that I like too, and I hear most often. Let's start with PR maturity. So if we think about PR maturity, think about putting up a pull request and maybe it has 100 lines of code of change in that PR. And what PR maturity looking at is the ratio of the amount of changes. So let's say that you had 20 different lines that were changed after the PR was open, you'd have a PR maturity ratio of 80%. What are your thoughts on that new metric that was added, PR maturity?
Want to start, Rob?
We might talk about this for an hour. Okay, so I think this. Well, I feel like we're gonna get to the punchline of the whole thing on the first item. But one of the things that I think about metrics in general is that they're a great way to understand where you should start looking. They're not going to give you all the answers to what's happening in your organization. They're going to say, hey, that's interesting. Let's go ask a question about that. And what's really important there is what you're looking for when you ask those questions is what is the surrounding context? Why do these numbers look the way they look? And the thing that I love about this and a few of these different metrics is you could describe a fantastic organization and a terrible organization that show the same numbers, right? So PR maturity, again, how much change is there after someone puts up a PR, right? The fantastic organization, you have teams pairing on code. By the time the PR goes up, 2 people have looked at it, they've built it together, and someone goes, yep, let's put that in, no problem. We've all agreed that this is the right thing. In the less awesome organization, people are rubber stamping PRs, right? Nobody actually asks any questions. They just put them up and they're like, yeah, go for it. Just like, hey, it looks interesting. I don't know. I don't really have time to read your PR. I got my own work to do. And I guess, I'd always ask, which one of those do you want to work in? right? So you can't just look at one of these metrics and say, my company is elite, my company is terrible. You can say, that tells me something about what's happening. What else do I need to know to sort of triangulate what's really happening in the organization?
Yeah, I was at reInvent last week, as I think like half the living world. And gosh, there was a lot of people in Vegas. And there was a talk about collaborative AI and this new concept that the speaker was trying to hype up. And she said something really interesting, which was, collaborative AI is when you recognize that AI has all of the data and knowledge, but the human has the context. And I'm like, yeah, okay, I buy that. But that's actually true for just about anything. And I think it's, certainly true for metrics, right? And then the example that I think I gave before that we liked is when I was at Google, I almost never made commits. I was a manager, don't touch the code, I'd just break something. But there was a cleanup that we did. We did a code refactoring. There was like 1 million lines of code that was in the wrong spot and it was just sitting there. And I'm like, I'm going to go clean that up. So I made a PR that was a negative 900 million lines of code. I could assure you that it was not reviewed thoroughly, but it was the most exciting button press I've ever made in my life into GitHub. And, what would that, if without context, that would have been you just deleted the entirety of our intellectual property, right? Or some other responsive thing. So I think that, these metrics, PR maturity being, I think it's a good one, but it's like a piece of your Lego kit as an engineering leader for what do you want to be true and what do you want to value, right? And I would argue, I think Rob has some good examples, but I would argue other variations are, where are you in your career? As an engineering manager, you might want a lot of visibility on what your junior engineer is doing. And you see this long conversation in a GitHub PR about giving that person feedback. And now it's stored as part of the commit history, right? Whereas a senior engineer, you might see a couple of things because, they had a really deep whiteboard session at some point with the staff engineer and it came in pretty clean. So again, I think it's, love the concept of it, but I think it's, we really need to think about what do we do with it now that we're measuring it is kind of the important next step.
Yeah, I think, well, first of all, I love that story. That's a great story. But for all of these metrics, and I think for our audience listening today, the takeaway here is context matters a lot. So you're going to look at these metrics. We're going to look at some of these insights. We're going to talk about the benchmarks, but think for yourself, if you're sitting in the audience and listening, do I know the metrics for my organization? Can I say what they are? You are the ones that understand the context of your business, your project, what you're looking to deliver, the seniority of your team, the juniorness of your team. And I think what's great about everything that we're going to talk about today is that it opens up conversation to ask the right questions of yourself, of your team, and of your business. So I think, go ahead.
So I think there's another aspect of this that we've been talking about recently, and I'd love to see your reaction to this idea, which is a lot of time we think about developer velocity metrics, how fast your PR is going through, how long does it take you to do your code reviews, how long does it take you to write your tech spec, execute, et cetera, right? But if you think about that in the aggregate of a team, I realize that one of the things that I think is probably one of the most interesting aspects of this is how well it shows how well that team's leader is doing, right? If the team's leader is routinely, they're responsible for what their team delivers, right? So if the team's missing a lot of deadlines, maybe their engagement survey scores aren't so great, right? There's quality problems, there's low test rate. Maybe that's a piece of a leadership puzzle, part of your toolkit rather than a developer piece. I don't know.
Yeah, we talk a lot, I think, in this industry, not just at CircleCI, about kind of the delivery unit as the team, measuring velocity as a team. The way that I think about that is, to your point of the manager, I expect the team to be effective and I care about the team's delivering, but then what happens inside the team, right? If one person is not contributing, that's a concern of the manager. And then I guess your point is if the whole team's not delivering, that's probably a manager issue. It's not an individual issue. There's other dynamics in organizations. We could go on forever, but
everything depends.
Right, exactly. But I think the resolution, being able to see below the level of the team, to me is the responsibility of the manager, meaning I can't see that much from the outside, but from the outside, it's really hard to see the dynamic that created this scenario, right? Okay, yes, your team is not delivering as much value as another team, or you're missing your deadlines, you're unpredictable in your delivery, you have lots of incidents, whatever you care about. But there's some dynamics inside the team that's causing that to happen. And to me, it's the manager's responsibility to figure that out.
Yeah. And having that signal, right, is really kind of a key indicator.
So you're right. We probably could have spent an hour just on this first metric. I'm going to
keep us going, Dan.
I'm going to move us forward and actually start looking at some of the insights. We have 5 or 6 to go over here. And the first insight is around the pull request lifecycle. So I'm going to read the key takeaway here. PR size, so pull request size, is the most significant driver of velocity across the PR lifecycle. And what the little graph is showing you here is as PRs get larger, cycle time or velocity also gets larger. And as PRs get smaller, your merge frequency increases and your cycle time decreases. Now, I love this insight. It's actually, when I'm working with customers, usually the first one that we talk about around PR size. And usually when I come in and work with a customer, the PR size is a little bit large. And it's not even about the PR size being large. It's about what I was saying earlier with the context of why, what is causing. There could be a lot of different things that are causing that, ranging from, hey, you know what, we're working in a situation where we only are releasing once every month. So developers try to get everything into a PR or something like that to make sure it goes out. Otherwise, they'll mix the next release. Or it could be something that has to do with technical debt. Every time that I try to change something within this code base, I actually have to touch 5 different files and change all this stuff, even though it seems like a really, really small request of me. I'm actually having to touch a large amount of code. When you hear this takeaway of PR size is the most significant driver of velocity across the PR lifecycle, what comes to mind for the two of you?
I mean, I think the first thing is the word driver, and trying to, rep on behalf of my DSA team. Like, I think there's correlation. I don't know that we necessarily have causality there. Like, there are feedback loops in software development that work both ways, right? So, I think this is trying to say PR size leads to reduced velocity, but I would argue that reduced velocity leads to large PR size, right? So if people are slow to review and give me feedback, or it's expensive to get a PR through the process, then I will jam more stuff into the PR. And then I get this negative feedback loop. I make it bigger, people take longer, so I make it bigger, so people take longer. And now we're into month-long PRs instead of like I've worked in teams where, we would not even mention anyone's name, just write the PR, drop a link into Slack or HipChat back in the day. And someone would just review it in 3 minutes because they knew exactly what I was working on. They had the full context, right? So it can tell you something else about your organization. Again, everything is context, right? Are the people showing up to review saying, I don't know anything about this. Now I need to sit down and understand everything that surrounds this change, right? Therefore, I'm only going to do this on my coffee break in the morning, versus I could stop what I'm doing, review this, agree to it, and move on in a very short period of time. And so I think there's like organizational culture and structure that drives large PRs versus always being large PRs driving that organizational structure.
100% agree on that one. I think it may be non-obvious to some, but the large PR size, it's like, what bureaucracy do you have that's causing your developer pain, right? And especially in your example, you think that developers had to remerge 14 times. Now they're angry, right? So God only knows what's going into those updates.
I mean, you talked about, I think, a good situation where there's a shared context within the development team. So I think you said, hey, let's say that I was making a change. You already knew that I was going to be working on that. So when the PR goes up, you would say, oh yeah, I knew Dan was doing that. I have all the context. I could review this really quick. Now, I think on the flip side, in a situation where there's not a lot of context between the teams, so maybe the one team is working on many different things in parallel, and also the PR size is large, that doesn't sound like a fun review to me. If I'm a developer, I might say, you know what? I'm going to wait till, I don't know, Friday to do this. It's Monday. Or at least wait to the next day. I'd rather be coding. I'd rather be working on something of my own than unpack this enormous PR. So I'm not going to pick it up.
Yeah, I think that's exactly right. Like, I think, I'm thinking whip limits, right? I mean, it's kind of nuts how quickly you get from PR size to whip limits or whatever, right? Like whatever other tool we reach for. But, and I think as leaders, I don't know the makeup of the audience, but I know someone's laughing at this as I say it. Like, we're like, well, I have 6 engineers. That means I could do 6 things at the same time, right? And someone is saying, but we pair and that's more productive. And you're like, that doesn't make any sense. 2 people are doing the work of 1 person. But this is where that matters, right? 2 people driving up or even working kind of in the same area so that they're thinking about that problem, right? You and I are working on similar things. You're thinking about the same problem and I say, hey, I'm going to make this change. You're like, that totally makes sense. I was just thinking about that versus I haven't looked at that code base in a year. Now I need to go reread this whole chunk of the code base kind of thing. So like again, to the point of it being a sign of the dynamics that are happening in your organization more than just, because what happens, a warning to all you leaders out there, what happens when you read something like this, the simple version is like, we're going to tell all of our engineers they're not allowed to have more than 20 lines in a PR. Those PRs will be terrible. Right? It's going to be like, every single one will be exactly 20 lines. And you'll be like, what does this do? Well, there's another 20 lines coming. Right? Like, it's nonsense.
I'm pretty sure there's a Dilbert cartoon about this.
I mean, we all live in a Dilbert cartoon for sure, but like, you can't drive from the number, right? That's the point. This is the beginning of a conversation. You go say, okay, what are we doing? Like, where are we falling down? Why are we working on too many different things, right? And so I just think there's a ton that comes out of this.
Yeah. Actually, what you made me think of also, if I'm a team leader, or maybe I'm planning my sprint, maybe we would be more inclined to say, hey, let's tackle a particular problem together this sprint so everyone has the same context. When the PR goes up, I already know. Because the other way to do it is say, okay, I have 6 developers on the team. I'm going to go send you off on 6 different missions. Well, probably your review time is going to be much larger.
And you better hope you don't find any buses near your team, right? So, single points of failure or thing. I think that the other thing I'm actually curious about, and I remembered it after the last, when we did the webcast, which is, I remember if we asked this question, like what constitute a pull request? Like, so for the context, for example, of really tight teams moving quickly, how much of that code, and how much of the culture is around developer documentation, right? Is there a markdown that's included in that? And, and maybe there's more documentation, or maybe there's more documentation plus unit tests than there is code, right? So I think, again, there's another sort of contextual aspect of this metric that might be kind of interesting to think about, because in, my ideal world, the PRs are of reasonable size for the whatever it is that they're solving for, but also include some tests and some documentation, and hopefully something like an architectural decision review. So 6 months from now, when we go look at it, like, why did we do that? Oh, right. Because Rob said that we were going to do this thing. And so I think that, again, loving the concept of how can you make this an actionable metric, to drive the culture that you want to see. Maybe it's, something like young developers, smaller scope problems, smaller PRs, bigger developers, probably touching more things. You're doing a big refactor. That's going to be huge, right? How can you, but then that the outcome of that is then your subsequent PRs will start to get smaller again, because now you don't have to touch. At Netscape, we had this one header file, net.h. I'll never forget this. It had the world's largest global symbol table in it. It was so big, we had to have a custom compiler from SGI because it wouldn't compile in the regular compiler. I'm saying this now because, everybody involved is now dead. They're not dead, but they should be dead. It was a wretched thing, right? And so, the interns weren't allowed to touch that file. And you think, oh, well, that was 30 years. Jesus Christ, that was 30 years ago. But we're humans. We keep making the same mistakes over and over again, right? And so I think the interesting thing is, like, before we were leaning in on where do the leadership go into this, but I also wonder, like, how can you make this directly actionable for that junior developer, right? For him to understand, or him or her to understand what they're doing.
I mean, regardless of causality or whatever, like the tooling, right, or the approaches as a, I guess I would just share a story in a second, but like feature flags, right? Branch by abstraction. How do I make PRs that are not the whole unit of work, but allow people to keep up with my context? That's another approach, right? Like I've got someone, maybe we're working on slightly different things. I'm like, hey, I'm thinking of doing this. I'm thinking of doing this. I'm testing it out. I'm getting feedback in production. These are all great things, right? Instead of, I need to write the whole thing, it's kind of going back to the PR maturity thing. And then we're going to get into it with refactoring later. I'm so excited. Sorry, spoilers. But like, what tools do I have as a developer to actually write small PRs? Are we coaching, are we training our younger developers on how to break down work in a way that isn't necessarily complete, but allows us to evaluate our ideas along the way? And I think there's lots of opportunity in there.
Yeah, I'll push us forward, but that's exactly why I usually like starting with PR size when I go to work with a customer. And for you all in the audience, like even if you just know what your PR size is and you have a conversation with it about the team, you're going to discover something. Whether you want to make it smaller or you're okay with the size, like Rob's saying, they might say something back to you like, yeah, I'd love to have smaller PRs, but I don't trust our feature flagging capability. Whatever it is, we don't have it. I don't know how to use it. So my PRs are heap. So a few of the supporting insights, if we move on to the next slide. Larger PRs wait longer to get picked up for review. I think it makes sense, right? Who wants to review an enormous PR? No one, right? Going to save that for another day. Larger PRs have longer cycle times, probably for the same reason. Larger PRs take longer to approve. I think all of these pretty much correlate together. PRs that wait longer for the review to start also take longer from approval to merge. And larger PRs are modified more heavily during the review.
With my ginormous PR being an exception.
Yeah, besides you.
It took 2 hours.
There's an exception to every rule, but
There
you
really
should not
is.
build your plan on, 900,000 line.
It was something stupidly large.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Let's move on. Oh, this one's funny. Let's move on to the
ready.
next insight here. So project management hygiene. So key takeaway. Poor project management hygiene is directly correlated with higher velocity. So I'll say it again. Poor project management hygiene is directly correlated with higher velocity. You know what this made me think about, actually?
Jira tickets are for suckers.
I'm ordering my t-shirt right now.
Hackathons.
Yeah, no, it's
So why did it make me think about hackathons? If you think about a hackathon, you're usually working with a few individuals, a few developers that you probably, usually know pretty well. You're definitely not going to Jira and coming with your idea and saying, let me write a story before we go and work on this hackathon project. Yeah, at hackathons, I've seen developers, not only come up with some of the coolest features for the business, but move at a really rapid rate, 24 hours. And I think, when I think back to a hackathon, it's the situation where the developer is also the product manager in a sense. We have a shared context. I don't need to open a Jira ticket. I don't need to explain everything that I'm doing. And therefore I move very, very quickly. Now, what's the downside to putting hackathon code into production?
Oh, that's a really good way to kill your company.
Quality, right? So anyways, when I saw this, I started to think about that type of hackathon mentality, but I'd love to hear what you two think about this key takeaway.
I mean, I think it's, the more you call it bureaucracy, you call it process, call it whatever, the more of it, whatever it is, it's going to slow things down. So going back to something that Rob was saying earlier, how do we have a collective shared context that allows us as engineers to move forward with the lowest amount of friction, right? Inevitably, this really becomes ultimately a scale problem. A lot of people love working on in the tiny startups. The engineering team is less than 100 people, right? That's glory days. It's the greatest time of their life. And then if they stick with it, and the company is successful, next thing you know, the engineering team is 1,000 people, and they're bemoaning their very existence, right? Why? Because the amount of there's probably an order of magnitude more products and an order of magnitude more enterprise customers that are picky and all the other things, and we got to slow down, right? So I would also argue, I work for a company that makes databases. Let me tell you how often our enterprise customers want to upgrade their database. Never, right? So that's a different kind of problem. But I do think there's again, as you scale your organization, as you grow your development team, keeping friction low as you can, recognizing it will be as low as it was when you started, I think is a good goal to keep in mind. So, you don't let that tech debt get too crazy, because what inevitably happens is your quality goes down, right? And then the VPs are going, oh no, we got to bring in all of these Scrum Masters and we're going to do Agile and everything will be better. Sorry, I didn't mean to make you choke. But that's what
How long are we going to do the training for with the Agile?
So, not to bag on Scrum Masters and Agile, it's fine if that's your thing. It's not, I'm not an Agile person. But I think that, there's a balance, right? Sometimes even within let's say CircleCI has got this new thing, you're going to go out quickly, go to market, product testing, whatever. And then you're going to slow down as much as you have to in order to make sure that you meet your enterprise needs. It's interesting.
I think there's another example that I would use on I guess similar to the hackathon is, we use this a bunch, is incidents.
Oh, yeah.
And one of the things that I would say, when I reflect on incidents, not that I wish them upon anyone, but I kind of like them or enjoy them anyway. But you have clarity of purpose, right? You've shared context. Everyone knows there's one priority. Right, it's what everyone says they want in their organization, but it only occurs during the most stressful time that anyone experiences in their organization.
After you enter the war room together,
right,
and get the context.
Right, it's does anyone say, oh, but we also need to worry about that typo over here? Everyone's like, why are you talking about that right now? We have one thing that matters, right? And that's what people kind of strive for. And so the question is can you create that? And I don't mean with the caffeine-fueled 72-hour stretch of insanity or whatever, but can you create that quality of work, that sort of singular understanding of what matters more broadly than in either those hackathons? I mean, hackathons are always funny to me because everyone's like, oh yeah, well, no, we need to have a hackathon so we can do some innovation. I'm like, well, what are you doing the other 51 weeks of the year? We should probably just make innovation something that we do, right? The fact that we need exceptions in order to be great at delivering feels weird. It feels like a problem to say, if that exists in your organization, please go address that problem. And the other thing that I think about this particular metric is I personally believe, I don't know if people are familiar with this meme, great project management hygiene is probably maximizing your mediocrity. Teams that are at the absolute bottom of the curve and have no idea what they're doing and are cowboy coding or whatever, they would rank poorly on this. But the best teams that I've ever worked on have not been that concerned about whether they put the right Jira ticket number in the PR so that everyone could follow the flow, because they knew exactly what they were trying to deliver. Everybody knew exactly what they were trying to deliver and said, hey, take a look at this real quick. You think we should fix this? Yeah, okay, what if we moved it over there? Okay, great. Yeah, let me do that right now. Oh, now it's in production, right? And so I think the best teams capture that in a way that's hard to represent. Now, that's really tricky because I have this conversation all the time. People are like, how would we know from a metric perspective if we were truly like a high performing team? And I'm like, I don't know. You'll feel it. I mean, tell me if I'm wrong, but like at some point, all the process is creating overhead, right? Like process, I think we said this before, but like processes to me create a floor, right? It's like, how do we raise kind of our lowest performance up to a point, but being phenomenal, I just don't think you can process your way to phenomenal. I take.
I'll give you a few examples on the other side. So I agree with you. Let's say that, you're a really elite team. You've worked together a long time. Maybe you're in the office together and you can easily turn around and say, hey, Rob, I'm going to just letting you know, I'm going to do this thing. You have the context. Now, if I think about some large enterprises, we're in an era of distribution. We're working all around the world. Some of my teammates might actually not be sitting across, the way from me. We may be working from home. We may be a new team that just came together. And if we're working in this mode where, nothing is documented, tickets don't have an associated branch, I think the flip side can also happen where you're actually producing maybe terrible code that would not help the business in the long run, cause bugs in production. So I think there's like a really fine line here. The other thing that I would say is when you told me about the innovation, like with the hackathon, like why do we have to do a hackathon in order to do innovation? Some of the companies that I'm working with say, hey, we want to do more innovation. I'll say, okay, well, how much are you doing today? I'll say, I have no idea. I just need to do more. Well, a different situation can be, hey, I actually do have pretty good hygiene. I can tell you how much innovation effort we're putting into, versus keeping the lights on versus enhancing features. And maybe we can go back to the business and say, look, we're pretty organized here. We don't get any time to do any innovation. We're doing it 1% of the time. Could we bake that into our normal workflow? So I think there's kind of like, it goes back to the beginning of the conversation, that context. There's a lot.
So again, I'll reiterate, I think this is ultimately a scale problem, right? Like my team or my specific team runs from Sydney to Frankfurt, right? So me being in the West Coast is actually nice because I can actually take meetings without being up in the middle of the night like I had to do at my last job where I had a team in Bangalore. Not there's anything wrong with Bangalore other than it's 12 and a half hours away. There's just no good meeting time. But so what I always tell my team is you need as much process as helps you. If it's getting in your way, get rid of it, right? And you're not allowed to complain about it without saying what you're going to do to fix it, right? And so I think that goes back. So it's a scale issue and it's also a leadership issue, right? I think if you let your engineering team, bitch and moan about, pardon my French, about, oh, this is getting in our way, we can't get any work done. I'm like, well, that's not my problem. Get your work done, right? If this is getting in your way, solve it or ignore it and then justify it because now you've made your delivery. And so, don't have a culture of learned helplessness around this, I think is the trap that often as companies scale, they fall into that. And that's just dark times. And then you have a lot of work to do to unravel that.
Or maybe even automate it. So, okay, a few supporting insights here. If we're moving over to the next slide, hopefully up top. When the percentage of branches not linked to issues is higher, the shorter the coding time. When the percentage of branches not linked to issues is higher, the shorter the review time. I think that's a mutual context type situation. And when the percentage of branches not linked to issues is higher, the shorter the merge time. So this is our second insight. Move us forward to the third insight. DORA metrics. So we have a key takeaway here. Organizations with a longer cycle time have a higher rate of failures in production. Okay, so organizations with a longer cycle time, the longer my cycle time, the more failures I have in production. You know what this one made me think of?
CI/CD.
It made me think of you, Rob. But before I thought of you, I thought of my 4-year-old daughter who's learning to ride a bike because I'm observing this actually every day. As she's going slower, there's more failures in production, like falling over. This is the metaphor that I've heard lots of people use. But as she's starting to learn, be brave and pedal faster, she's steadying out. So that's the first thing that I thought about my daughter. And then I thought about you, Rob.
Yeah.
So I'm going to pass it over to you because I think you know, your experience and, you know, where you're working now. What do you think about this?
Yeah, I mean, this is my life, but I think it's everyone else's, right? Like the DO and DORA is for DevOps, is it not? Like at some point, we realize that if something is hard, you should do it more often. I will say before I got to CircleCI, I started a company with the gentleman who's now the CEO of CircleCI. And he was actually the one, he's a product person by background. He was the one who said, I think it was 2011, you know what we should do? We should do continuous deployment. I was like, what are you talking about? And he said, oh, what we're going to do is like, as soon as we write the code, we're going to push it in production. I'm like, nah. Releasing is terrifying. Releasing requires 3 pots of coffee and a weekend because you got to put it in production and then you got to clean up the mess, right? Like that's the life we all lived prior to that. And I remember I actually go through this with the kind of new hires at CircleCI. There's, if you go back and like find the original blog post, does anyone remember IMVU? How's that pronounced, by the way? Anyone know?
I don't even know I ever saw it written.
Oh, Eric Ries, right? So he wrote the Lean Startup. He started that company, IMVU, I don't know, whatever. Doesn't matter. They wrote a blog post about continuous deployment. They're sort of like one of the early practitioners, Etsy, like, I don't know if anybody remembers this time. Anyway, they wrote a blog post and then he, the author of the blog post from IMVU wrote a follow-up describing the discussion on Hacker News, which is where you should get all your feedback, by the way, about this concept. And the thread was like, this company obviously hates their customers. You are not going to be in business a year from now if you think that delivering continuously into production is a good idea. Fast forward, it's 2024 and it's the gold standard.
Yeah.
Right? So like, thank you also, if there are any visionaries out there who are trying things that no one's ever done before, like someone has to go do it, right? Someone has to go get the bloody nose and be like, wow, that was terrifying, but we got through it and now we're doing great stuff. This is like the most unsurprising thing, right? Like small units of work, fresh context, right? I mean, I used to work in like telephony. Has anyone worked on like year-long release cycles? Please tell me you're not still doing that. But like, someone says, oh, this is broken. And you're like, wait, did I write that? I literally have no idea what I was thinking when I wrote that 10 months ago, as opposed to like, I wrote it this morning, I put it in production this afternoon, right? So first of all, super low risk, I can fix it. I'm putting out releases that are like 10 lines of code change or whatever, right? Tiny PR is going straight into production instead of the last 3 months of work going into production. Like just the risk is so high. And so when the risk gets high, you slow down, right? You're like, well, we could release this thing, but we got to get a whole bunch of people together. We got to prep the war room because there will be an outage. Like we don't know what outage. We just know it's going to break. Like, and then everyone's so cautious. And once you feel comfortable that you can deploy whatever you've built, then you just go and you go and you go and you go. And it's so good. If you're not doing this right now, like, come find me. You don't need to use my product, but my God, please do this.
Well, so I have a funny story about this. Company will remain unnamed, but we had 2 major engineering teams. And this is when I really would have loved the DORA metrics. This predated the DORA metrics. And the one team was getting into continuously, let's go fast. But when they started, they went super slow as far as quality. They didn't have enough tests. They didn't have the systems. They didn't have the sort of muscle. And the other team was inheriting their changes. And we could never convince that other team that even when the first team was actually doing successful delivery multiple times a day, anytime there was a problem, it was that team's fault. You know, and that's when I was really missing. Like, we need a platform that tells us what them, you know, to prove. Like, no, it's you, it's not them. Anyway, you want to keep going?
No, I know where you could find one, but
yeah,
you keep going.
It was a very frustrating experience.
Yeah, you know, I think the other thing to add on to what both of you are saying, especially Rob, is if you have code that's sitting there for a long time, it's going to degrade. If you are not confident to get code out in small chunks, it probably means that you don't have the right testing practices, automation practices,
System architecture.
feature flag type situation, system architecture. So I think the other context thing here is, here's an indicator. If you are able to have small releases that go out all the time, you probably have the full infrastructure and ecosystem in place to do so. And therefore, you're going to be in a much better situation in terms of quality.
The one thing that I want to add, sorry, I'm going to drag this out, but this is my life, is the superpower of this is not the code quality. Like, yes, you recover from incidents, you take out the risk, but the thing that you're actually de-risking when you deliver all day, every day, is not the quality of your code. It's the fact that you are undoubtedly, I don't care what business you're in, I don't care how good your product managers are, you are building the wrong thing right now. And the longer you go on the wrong path, building the wrong thing, the more money you are wasting not building the right thing for your customers. And if you are shipping 3-4 times a day and getting customer feedback 3-4 times a day, we changed this thing. We changed this thing. No one gives a crap about this thing we just built. Let's take it back out. People familiar with painted doors? Like, we put up the button that doesn't even do anything and no one clicked on it. You know what we should not do? Build the feature behind that button. But so many teams spend 6 months building the feature to put it out, and the last thing they do is put up the button to find out that nobody clicks on the button. That's 6 months of engineering effort that you could have put into something that your customers care about. And so, yes, you should absolutely reduce the risk of your changes, but what you're really doing is getting yourself turning towards the path of what your customers care about as quickly as possible. And that's where this really, like, this is just your cycle time will be lower, but it's not just that your cycle time is lower. It's that everything you deliver is high value to your customers because you're building the right thing. And that is when your business is going to take off.
Right, which is the one thing about Agile I really like, right? Which is early to customers and iterate, right? Which was the whole DevOps thing was invented to, how do you do that, right? And so it's like, oh, punchline, that there it is. DevOps itself is kind of the button. And then we broke other things. We said, oh, we have DevOps now, so we don't need QA teams. There I threw that hot take down.
That could be
That's
another hour.
That's another hour.
Okay.
That's for dessert.
Yeah.
Okay, perfect. Let me push us forward here. A few supporting insights on the next slide. Just what we've already been saying. The longer the cycle time, the higher the change failure rate. There's correlation there. The longer the deploy time, the higher the change failure rate correlation there. I think it makes. Insight number 4. Well, we talked about this a little bit already in the beginning, but a higher pull request maturity ratio correlates to higher velocity. So a higher maturity ratio correlates with higher velocity. Talked about it a little bit in the beginning. Do we have more to add here? Anything else on PR? Maturity and velocity?
I mean, so we say that highly mature PRs go quickly. Yes, right? I struggle with this one, to be honest, because if we go back to the hackathon example, yes, if we have no process, no JIRA tickets, no product planning, no PR queues, whatever.
You can move fast.
You can move really fast, but you're producing unusable garbage from a business perspective. That's sort of a harsh take, but that's an extreme example. But yes, I think that if all of those other things have lined up, right, that the culture is good, the planning is good, the modularity of your system architecture is sufficient, et cetera, then absolutely, right? But I think the quality bar has to be correlated to the previous thing, which is what's your failure rate, right? And then your resolution rate. So
I feel like I'm in the right room to make a request for next year's report. I'd like to see this over time, because velocity over time is actually, lowercase l velocity, not like story points. I can't even remember what they're called for a second. They're story points, whatever. But like, how fast am I delivering business value? And how are my approaches to software engineering impacting that over time? Because I think one of the most common things that happens, you take your hackathon example, is we're fast at the beginning and then we just it degrades, right? Because we didn't have the maturity, the process, whatever that is. And it would be really interesting to see some of these metrics, how they evolved over the course of 12, 24 months. Because you have all the data, so that's awesome. Because I think that would be really telling, right? What I care about as an engineering leader is not how fast did you move this week or this month or this quarter, but can we sustain that for an extended period and consistently, predictably deliver value? And all the times we're really fast right now, we know we're going to hate ourselves in about 6 months for whatever it was that we did.
Yeah, I mean, I think, what's the definition of it's quality time, feature set, pick any two, right? Because what do we know for a project that has a certain longevity? Yeah, you get to the point where it's okay, it's basically there. And then what you want to actually see is the quality correlates to the churn rate, right? So you know that the successful, mostly complete project, the pull request maturity might be good, but the velocity should just go through the floor because you're not touching it anymore. You're moving on to the next thing, the thing that's going to make you money a year from now or 6 months from now, right? So I think there's some really interesting ways, and I +1, I would love to see this over time.
Yep. So a new metric that was added this year. So I think a 5th generation will be even better here. I'm going to push us forward because I think we're coming up on time. Maybe we leave.
People want to eat.
Yeah, people want to eat. They're hungry. They want another drink. Here's the last insight that we have, and it's around predictability. So the key takeaway is around capacity accuracy. So what it's saying here is over half of engineering projects undercommit against their goal, and less than 25% of projects fell within the ideal range. So when we're thinking about undercommitting, what it really means is, hey, I can really deliver this amount of story points, but I'm only going to say that I can deliver maybe 80% of them. So I'm under promising so that I can over deliver in order to hit my predictability goal or to be on time.
This one blew my mind, I have to say, because I've been doing this for 30 years. Every engineer, I can't think of an engineer that did not overcommit. I cannot think of one. In fact, I have this system where depending on who you are, you get a multiplier. No matter what you say, I'm going to multiply it by 3 because I just know. So this one is fascinating to me. I don't know your experience.
You have a Monte Carlo simulation for all your engineers. Well, two things that I think are interesting here. 100% agree with that. I'm just wait, there are engineers who actually undercommit. That's cool.
They're very smart, by the way. I agree with that.
So one thing that I read between the last time we talked about this and now, I don't know if people are familiar with Kent Beck. I love his latest book, Tidy First, but I started following his Substack. He published this thing called The Forest in the Desert. Did anybody read this? So he talks about different kinds of projects and the feeling, right? Again, kind of stepping away from the metric, but what it feels like. And in his forest model, he has roots, and he presented this with someone else, and I forget who it was, and I apologize. But and one of the roots are kind of the core things that have to be true in order to get to a great project, or a great team, or however you want to think about it. And one of the things in his list of roots was that you never commit to more than 50% of what you can get done. And so that's really interesting in this metric. And his whole point is you set yourself up, you put the time in place to do things well, right? Again, to that sustained velocity. And then he talks about the feeling, right? What does it feel like then to be there? The feeling is someone shows up and says, we're going to do a thing. We know exactly how to do it. We know exactly where it goes. We know what it would take to do it. All of those things that it just feels like in so many projects, you're I have no idea. Let's just pick a number and pretend we could get it done in that amount of time. And so I think leaving space, kind of to your point, everyone's overcommitted, right? Everyone underestimates what it really takes to get something done. And then they get pushed up against the wall. They're well, we said we'd get this stuff done. And maybe if we just cut some corners, then we will get it done. So now they got it done. And the next time their estimate is even worse because they just made the system harder to work on. And there's this kind of negative feedback loop that, I think, I don't know. I just think we as engineers tend to put ourselves, and as a leader, I'll say it's probably my fault. I don't know why yet, but it probably is. But like, put ourselves in that situation where we believe something is achievable. We feel we're smart. We know how to get stuff done. And then we create that negative scenario where we're like, well, I said I could get it done. So now I am going to get it done by like not sleeping and cutting corners and all these kinds of things. And then we make it worse for the next round and the next round and the next round. Whereas if you leave yourself the space, I think that you can. And then the other thing that I was going to say about this, I can't remember. Are people familiar with Marty Kagan, Silicon Valley Product Group? Anyway, it's got like a very large number of books. I don't know how he also does his job and writes all these books, but
Ghostwriting.
He reads his own audiobooks too. Props to Marty Kagan. Anyway, he talks about predictability versus innovation. Just since we talked about innovation earlier, and like that many R&D leaders are focused on predictability as the most important thing, but I can't remember who he's quoting when he says like 100% predictability is 0% innovation, right? Like when we are perfect at understanding how long everything is going to take, that means we have not taken any risks. We're not trying anything novel or anything new. And so, I think we need to, predictability tells you a lot about whether you understand your system, whether you're capable of doing the thing that you need to get done. But if all you're doing is just, we ticketed out the work and we delivered the work exactly as was planned, nobody's pushing the envelope. No one's taking risk. No one's innovating. And as a business, that's not going to be a great outcome.
One thing that I will say, when you look at the report, there's two different metrics here. One of this is capacity accuracy. There's another one that's planning accuracy. So when you think about capacity accuracy, it's kind of like the know thyself as a team, which means like know how much work you can get done in a sprint. Now that's different than planning accuracy. Planning accuracy is more so saying, I'm coming to you, Rob, and saying, hey, I think I can get this feature delivered on this date. And or let's say within a sprint, I think I'm going to do these exact 10 stories. Did I actually do those exact 10 stories? Or did I have bugs come in from production, or I actually wanted to do some innovation stuff? And I ended up doing 10 things, but it wasn't what I actually said I was going to do. So just a little bit of a distinction there. But yeah, all in the report, interesting stuff. Okay. So just a few takeaways here. So all of you do have the benchmarks report. Highly recommend you check it out. Highly recommend that for your own organization, what your data points are, how you match up against the benchmark, so that you can have the right conversation, kind of like how we did up here live with your teams. And I wanted to give a big round of applause and thank you to Tara and Rob for being our panelists today. Great job.
So, hello everyone, I'm Ben Lloyd Peterson. I'm one of the hosts of Dev Interrupted, and I'll be emceeing some of the event tonight. We've got a few minutes before dinner is ready. We have time, I think, for 3 questions. So if you have a question, we have a microphone that Andrew will bring around to you. So raise your hand if you got a question. See a couple already.
I love the example of the hackathon and project management and correlation over there. But a factor, how many of these hackathon projects actually become features is a question, because quality, clear understanding of the intent, there's a lot more that happens, right, from the product side. Speed is the primary factor in the hackathon. But there are other things that make a product market fit. So any thoughts on that?
So I certainly do. I've seen a bunch of different companies do hackathons, and I think the ones that are the most successful are the ones where, the senior leadership and engineering and also the product team, is heavily involved in either seeding the themes, right? And then committing to identifying and then executing and making space for execution that creates a really positive feedback loop, right? Like, here is a customer problem we don't have a good solution for, or here's a set of challenges, go off. And then the engineering team sees, oh, we actually took a couple of those and turned those into actual features. We invest in that time, and it was an enormous success. I think where you don't see this success, where it's, very kind of low key, it's mostly a reason to hang out and, code from the beanbag in the office and eat free pizza. You don't get the value add. And then at some point, somebody realizes, wow, this is a really expensive prospect. We got 500 engineers who are basically just fucking off for 24 hours. Let's stop. And now we don't have hackathons anymore.
How many things can I plus one in there? All of them. I didn't keep track. 10 plus ones. Is that plus 10? Yeah. I worry less about the quality. I worry about quality, but that's not the thing about hackathons. It's more the to the point of the question, is it aligned with what we're actually trying to achieve? And I think what I would encourage, and I sort of got into this on the DORA metrics thing, right? Like, if you can get real feedback from your customers by delivering something in the same day, life feels like a hackathon, right? Like, I think that a lot of that spurt is spawned, I can't speak English all of a sudden, from my life is drudgery, my project management hygiene is super high, and all I do is execute the tickets that were, perfectly framed for me.
Kill me now.
And involving your engineers, even if it's just more senior, like your tech leads or whoever that might be, involving them in the product discovery is kind of the ideal for me. If it feels like I need to take a week off and sit in the beanbag and eat the pizza and make whatever I want, that's often because my job doesn't feel particularly fulfilling. So I would encourage a deep think about what it is to get your folks engaged all the time. So it doesn't feel like a hackathon is this special treat where I get to work on stuff I like. That seems terrible.
Yeah, one variation I've seen, it's been kind of interesting. I think this is depends on the company, but rather than hackathons, they would do rotations of engineers into sales engineering or technical services, right? So it's no, you're getting the customer empathy by solving real world problems. And a lot of times engineers would come back, if we did this thing, you would actually make that support story a lot better, or that robustness a lot better. So I think there's a lot of different ways that you could approach this theme, right? Around getting ultimately what you want, which is engineering, a sense of engineering ownership and accountability in the success of the customer experience.
Hello. Thank you all. I like this talk. I want to hackathon when Tara was working at MongoDB. I was working
Oh
at
my God, is that Marcus?
Is it?
Hi, Marcus.
Hi, Tara. I just sent you an email, but it's irrelevant. I didn't realize, but there's a lot of talk right now about there's a ton of engineers, most engineers even at these larger companies, Fang and many others, or more than 500 engineers or so, where the vast majority of them just do the bare minimum to stay employed. And maybe that's reflected in this mythical undercommitted metric that I never would have guessed. What do you do about a situation, a team where one or two engineers are really outperforming, but everybody else they're fine. They're not no one's terrible. So it's not a situation, it's not a situation like you're talking about earlier with there's a leadership puzzle piece to address, but everyone's doing okay, but then some people seem to be fantastic. Is that normal? Or do you have something else to investigate? Is there more to get out of people? Is there a platform issue, tooling issue, or culture issue? I'm just curious what you all think about this notion of people are just barely doing any work. I've seen this.
It's the 10 times employee, right? I went first last time.
Oh man, so many thoughts. I think, you listed some ideas there. It's a really interesting question. You listen to my idea, like I said, platform problem, is it a tooling problem? Is it a culture problem? Like the answer is yes to one of those. And this is where like the whole theme of metrics are the start of a conversation, right? Like, okay, I can see that a couple people on my team are, whatever your measure might be, they're just delivering a lot more, they're writing better code, they're super engaged while other people are a little checked out. That's your manager's job, right? Is to figure out, do they have the skills? Are they engaged in the problem we're solving? Are they, 5% of the time? I have no percentage. Some percentage of the time, that person just has some shit going on in their life. And they were actually great 3 months ago. They're going to be great in 3 months, and they're just going through some stuff. And sometimes they are absolutely terrified to show up at work every day because they feel like they have no idea what they're doing, and someone's going to find out. I cannot tell you which of those scenarios it is from looking at a dashboard, right? And so it's absolutely telling, right? If some people are able to execute really effectively in that environment, then you have an interesting baseline. Some people are executing here and some people are executing here. So it's not the environment holistically, right? We talk about this with like twins raised in the same environment, same genetics. Okay, but they end up different. Okay, what have we learned? I can't tell you what the answer is, but I can tell you there's something interesting there. And I would want a manager to be going and figuring that out. Like if it, there was kind of open with the like, what do you think about people kind of drifting by and not, just doing the bare minimum? It's not the ideal. It's not what I want in my organization. I understand it happens, but the first step is just understanding why, right? And some people might just be burned out on your organization. Maybe they need a change. That's totally fine, right? But if you're not even having that conversation, what will happen in that scenario, again, I'll call it 80% of the time, I'm making up random percentages, is those two people that are crushing it probably gonna leave. Because they're like, wait a second, I'm carrying the team and everyone else is making the money I'm making, but I'm doing all the work, right? So it's important to address, there's plenty of human factors and it's complex for sure. But if you don't address it, what you're gonna get is just a team of people who are just phoning it in. That much I guarantee.
Yeah, just added, I think it totally goes back to the team leader and to the manager. Each one of the developers on the team is going to have different aspirations, what motivates them, what a good experience looks like. You can probably ask 3 to 4 questions and find out, hey, do you like the product that you're working on? Yes or no? Are you inspired by the technology that you're using? Do you feel that you have the right career path here? And are you motivated, if I'm the team leader, by me? Am I giving you inspiration? You ask a few questions, you'll probably find out. The 2 that are performing really well probably have good alignment on most of those. The ones that aren't performing as well, there's gonna be a major gap.
So yes, to all that. I think there's another thing, and I've had some success with this, which is, how intentional are you as a leader about your culture, kind of in the broad sense, right? Well, one, first of all, humans aren't fungible, and don't treat them as if they are, because that way lies madness and chaos. But yet, bench management, to Rob's point, super critical. Don't take your top performers for granted. Then think about, how do you incentivize the type of culture you want? We say as leaders that we want employees that have a learning attitude, a learning mindset, right? Well, how do you know that, and how do you incentivize it? So there was a company I was working at that was kind of migrating out of a kind of a more stodgy, infrequent deployment, and wanted to get into the cloud. Wanted to, go faster. And I'm like, all right, well, what's the test story? I'm like, well, we don't have very many tests, automated tests, but we have a good QA team. I'm like, okay, well, they need to focus on the stuff that's hard to automate. We need the developers to write tests. Well, developers don't write tests. They're not QA. Now, this is the opposite side of the problem that we have now, which developers can't write negative tests. But in any case, so this is, we're all in the office. We have screens everywhere. I wrote some code that would cull stuff out of, we were using Bamboo, which is a terrible CI system. Don't use it. We were using Jira, like, okay, top build breaker, you would get like a negative Chivo, like top, bug generator, you get a negative Chivo, top bug fixer, oh, you get happiness and light. And it was a total like Mario Kart sort of experience all over the engineering organization. What do you know? The number of tests went up, the number of failures went down because we made a game out of it, right? So that's not going to work for every organization. It's not going to work for every product team, right? But, again, goes back to, these metrics are critical tools, not outcomes. in and of themselves, right? That is the biggest thing. What you get the data, make sure it's accurate as possible, and now do something with it. Don't just have a dashboard that you kind of look at every once in a while and think, that's interesting. The time to eat, Dan.
I hope so. All right.
One more.
Right.
Just one more?
One more.
All right.
Just a quick one. So during the discussion about CI/CD, Tara, you dropped a little grenade about companies throwing out their QA processes in sort of the search for CD nirvana, and you touched on it just briefly. But I want to know what, from your perspective as a leader who's seen kind of the adoption of CI/CD, how is the best kind of what's been the best approach for folding in an existing QA process into a migration to CI/CD?
So, I mean, to me, the value of QA, like a QA engineer, their value is that they understand how to break things, right? They're multipliers on the robustness and reliability of your system. Developers know how to write, statistically speaking, I'm not saying absolutes, but developers, statistically speaking, are really good at writing tests that prove that what they wrote worked, not how to prove that it doesn't break under different circumstances. And so the domain of QA, I think that we as an industry have too often blithely kind of tossed, it has lost that art. Now, you could argue used to be you could automate back-end stuff that's all APIs, but you couldn't automate front-end now. And then SonarQube and other companies came out, well, now you can automate your front-end. But that still doesn't solve, I think, having the domain expertise to guide the negative aspects, right? The stress testing, what have you. And what we've turned it into is incidence management. It's like, it got out to production. And now if we can fix it fast, we're okay. And maybe that's the right answer, right? I'm not like an oracle of truth here. But I do think that as an industry, we've lost something there. And I think it'll be interesting. And I suspect it will actually come back around. Everything in the internet is cyclical in my experience. So I think people are if they still have QA teams, they probably are still getting value. If they're struggling in a lot for quality issues, they're probably thinking, maybe we need some QA experts, if, hopefully they don't still exist, to come in and help guide how we do production operations, how we do CI/CD in interesting ways. I think it's an interesting thought exercise, honestly. I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, I definitely agree with the developers testing the assumptions that they've made. Proving that the assumptions they made work, as opposed to questioning the assumptions they've made, right? At QA, the best sort of QA folks that I've known in my life were that. They're like, what happens if I type this crazy string in here? And you're like, well, you just crashed the entire site. That's pretty impressive. How'd you think of that? I don't know. It just made sense to me, right? And I think that's missing. I will say at CircleCI, we do not have anyone with the title quality QA, anything like that. I mean, that's been true since I got there. And we have built a large amount of tooling for ourselves and unsurprisingly for our customers to allow you to mitigate risk in production deployment, to make it so that, if something does go wrong, it impacts a very small number of your customers. It's easy to remediate, et cetera. So I think there's many strategies, but I do think that's an interesting piece that we've, does anyone have a replacement for the baby bathwater metaphor? Because it kind of freaks me out, but that's the one you would use, right? We were like, we have automated testing, but we threw out with that the ability to reason about the weird edge cases that are going to break a system because you didn't think about them as you were implementing. But I think the question was really about making the transition. I mean, I think start. That's all. I mean, right? Take it in small increments, find a way to test a certain part of your platform. Take the things that are fairly stable and put in regression tests, those sorts of things. I think a lot of people, when they try to make big transitions to anything, any technology or whatever, try to do something all in. And spoiler, I don't even know what you're thinking about right now, but that's going to fail, right? Doing anything all at once is just guaranteed to fail. It's going to be way bigger than you ever imagined. You're never going to get there. But if you can find a way to do it in small increments, you can make any transition over time.
Right. And I think, just to close it out, I think one of the main reasons that, I as a DevOps aficionado, I kind of mourn the fact that DevOps contributed to this concept, because you can't have manual QA gatekeeping as part of a continuous delivery or continuous deployment mechanism, right? But I assert that there are probably different ways that we can approach this. Asynchronous is a thing, right? That, where do you insert them? Is it in the design phase? There's a lot of things there, but I think what you have to think about as a business is, where are you struggling? And, can can a different type of domain expertise help? And then figure out what that means.
Awesome. Well, let's hear it one more time for our guests.